the scariest thing that we don't know we're afraid of. And some of you may have heard of this, some of you may have not, but it is called the Fnords. And I'm going to relate that to something that's going on in the world presently, which is teachers complaining about online classes because of the chances of the classes being recorded and passed around, and of parents watching those classes. So, for those who don't know what a Fnord is, it's something that comes from what's called the Principia Discordia, and that is a description, so to speak, of Discordianism. By all means, go look it up. I'll leave the name down in the description. This was also talked about in the Illuminati trilogy, Robert Anton Wilson, and he had a co-author on that I don't have in my brain right now. But what a Fnord is it's something that an unenlightened person or an indoctrinated person cannot hear or see consciously, but it has an effect on them. So when a Fnord is present, you either completely ignore the thing in which it's present, like say it's in a news article, and it could be a word, and that's why we use Fnord, because if we said the thing or showed the thing that is a Fnord, you wouldn't be able to see it, but we'll get to that. So if Fnord or a Fnord was in a news article, then you would not really be able to comprehend that news article. You would ignore it. You might just look at it and be really confused, because we're taught to ignore everything around the Fnord, everything that exists around it. Or you might just entirely forget that you read that news article. And this could be something that you see on TV. This could be someone speaking to you and saying that thing, or giving some kind of an indicator of what would be called a Fnord. And it can be in all types of media. Another example would be in the X-Files. There was a person that they called the Ronin, if I'm remembering this correctly, and he was able to push people mentally and kind of convince them of things. And he could put on a name tag that said nurse or doctor on it, and people would believe that he was a nurse or a doctor. Well, if you were to put a name tag on that had Fnord on it, or a Fnord, just so we're not being confusing here, the concept is that nobody would be able to see you. You would be invisible to everyone you encountered, because they would see that and then their brain would switch to, I'm not allowed to see this thing. And so that sounds a little confusing, but as it's taught in the Principia and in the Illuminatus trilogy, we're taught not to see it as children, and everybody's taught this. So you can imagine a classroom full of children, and the teacher standing up in front of the classroom and writing the Fnord up on the blackboard. Maybe it's the word Fnord, maybe it's some kind of symbol, something like that. But that's being written up on the blackboard, and all the children are looking at it. But then there's something that's hypnotizing them. And that could be some actions of the teacher, it could be a device, it could be whatever it may be. But there is something involved with a hypnotic pattern usually, and this is just kind of an idea, and there is no definitive thing, because of course we can't remember it, we can't see it. So it makes it hard to talk about. But again, we're talking very conceptually here, so I'm not saying that there's a little device in every classroom. What I am saying is that there is something that hypnotizes and teaches these children. And so we learn to not see this. We're we're told by the teachers, and I'll clear up the teacher thing in a minute. So we're told by the teachers that if you see the Fnords, they will get you. And that could mean that the Fnords will get you, or as it's written, the Fnords will eat you. That could mean that you are somehow putting yourself in danger, as in anyone who is able to see the Fnords is a danger, and so therefore could have people coming after them. And so during this this process, any child who sees the Fnord gets scared by the teacher or intimidated by the teacher. And this will actually go into other students intimidating them as well, because there's this reward punishment thing that happens. And so the students that do, when they see another student seeing the Fnord, they attack that student because they need to keep them down, because they get a reward for going along with this process. And the students who don't see it, of course, they're not punished. They are left alone. They are maybe even rewarded. And so the idea becomes that allowing other people to see the Fnords without being punished, or seeing someone who is seeing those Fnords, noticing that someone is seeing those Fnords, is in itself like you could be punished for that if you don't act against them. Sorry, that's kind of a weird thing to say. Sorry for the stall there. But so anytime one student becomes aware of another student seeing the Fnords or understanding the Fnords or something like that, they have to join in, and this carries into adulthood. So anyone who sees someone else becoming enlightened to this becomes a target to other people who are trying to say, so to speak, lay low and follow along with what they're supposed to do because they were taught from childhood to be afraid. So then the question becomes, well, does that mean that all teachers are in on this? And the answer is both yes and no. Because it's not really necessarily the teachers, that's just a good way of illustrating it, is that classroom idea. It's entirely possible and more likely that we're all in on it, that we're all unknowingly acting as these teachers, that we are all unknown to ourselves, because again, we can't remember or see this. But we could be acting in a fashion that we are forgetting. So I myself could run across a child in a grocery store, and the child could point at a Fnord that's somewhere in the store, and this programming would take over, and I would, or anyone else around, would then scare, intimidate the child, in some way redirect them so that they are not doing this. And then, of course, we would forget about the instance because our subconscious won't let us see the Fnord. So it's only the subconscious that knows about the Fnord, so to speak. And then that won't allow us because we're afraid of that punishment. So we're all sort of, in a way, working together and being those teachers. And another important aspect of teachers, and how I relate this back up to the beginning of teachers complaining about the online classes, is that if there are parents who are awake to this, or for some reason they aren't passing this mind virus along, and I'll get to the mind virus idea in just one second, but then the virus would have to have still some way to spread and protect itself. And so teachers just happen to become a good way of doing this, because it's kind of like one location where all the children are going to be going through. Again, all very conceptual. Because of what the idea is, we can't speak directly about it. So I'll get to the mind virus part in a second, but there is a fungus that infects this one particular ant. And what it does is it takes over the ant's brain, and it causes the ant to go up to the top of a plant, basically as high as it can go, and just sort of stand there until it dies. And that's exactly what the fungus wants. It wants to be as high as possible so that when the ant dies, the fungus can spread itself as far as possible. So the higher it is, the further it can spread itself. So that ant is acting against its will. It is acting towards the will of the fungus, and it is being controlled by it. So it's going against its nature. It's behaving in a way that it wouldn't normally behave, but it's being forced to do it. It's being taken over. It's being overridden. And yes, I understand that we are more complex than an ant, but this mind virus would be more complex than a fungus. So it kind of works out. Now, the Fnord is a mind virus, and like anything else, it needs to spread. It needs to propagate. And in order to do that, it must remain invisible. It must remain secretive. And so teachers are infected. And now when I refer to teachers, I'm referring to all of us as teachers, but specifically teachers who are taking that role of having a group of kids and teaching them all to interact properly based on this mind virus. So they're all infected. So they are spreading the mind virus in their classes, in the world in general, without knowing, without remembering. It's just something that's happening. Just like the ant walking up to the top of the plant to die, it's just something that it's doing. It's being told it needs to do that. And so the subconscious of these teachers, it controls them to spread something that they know is wrong. So their conscious mind knows that this is wrong, knows that we shouldn't be spreading this kind of a virus that can control people. Because again, there are people who are awake to this and understand it, and that's how they can actually use the virus to sort of push their will upon people, as in they can get you to forget about things or be confused by things or ignore things as needed. So if what the teachers were teaching was right, like they knew in their hearts was right, they wouldn't mind their classes being recorded, those recordings being spread, the parents observing the classes. But a lot of teachers are taking issue with this. And you got to wonder if, like the ant, they're being forced to act against their free will. They're being forced to act in the will of the virus. And to spread that virus that they themselves were given. And I'm sorry, my notes are very long for this video, so they've moved way over here. That's why I keep looking over. And so this virus that we were all given, and we all spread until we find a way to break free of it. And a lot of times that's when you seem like an outsider, a weirdo. You start looking at information that other people in your group might not look at, that other people in your group might tell you to stop looking at because they're afraid of it. They're afraid of it just like they're afraid of the Fnord. They don't want to be eaten by it. They don't want you to be eaten by it. And that word eaten, that takes on some connotations as well, as far as the idea of being consumed by the thing. And so that's the fear, is you don't want to be consumed by this concept, this idea that you're looking at. And so what if this idea of the virus, the mind virus, the Fnord, is actually us being indoctrinated? Indoctrinated into something that we know in our hearts is wrong, but we feel compelled to believe it, to spread it. Even though we know it's wrong, we feel compelled anyways to do this. It is what we are indoctrinated into. It is the mind virus that we are given. So again, I've moved from Fnord to indoctrination. And what if the schools just make sure that virus of indoctrination is being properly spread? And they who have been indoctrinated now feel compelled to indoctrinate others. And what if there are many viruses, similar, all fighting for their own survival and their own spread? And so that could be said as there are many different Fnords, many different mind viruses, many different forms of indoctrination. And they are all competing just as a virus would, just as a species would, for some kind of control, for further propagation. And they are just trying to survive, just like we are. But in the process, they are controlling each and every one of us. They are guiding us, pushing us, forcing us to believe and to get others to believe and to raise children to believe and to attack others who do not believe. So I would invite you to take a temperature check, so to speak, and investigate every time you say something, every time you think something. Always have in the back of your mind, is this me? Is it me who thinks this? Or am I just afraid that if I don't believe it, that if I look at these other things that I'm not supposed to look at, that I will be eaten, that these others will attack me, that they will try to cause me harm in some way because I have gone against the indoctrination, against the mind virus? Let me know what you guys think in the comments. Go ahead and hit like and share it if you really did.